Romance understands something about loss that politics desperately wants to forget. In the context of Palestine-Israel, I've spent my last couple of videos starting to explore the idea of a good versus good conflict, and I've noticed that we don't get that sort of thing much in our stories. Because the gravitational force of narrative tends to steer away from irresolvable conflict and towards either synthesis or defeat.
Get used to disappointment.
This is also true of the Star Wars spin-off Andor, about which I made a video a few weeks ago. For all its grey zones, espionage, moral compromise and realistic political texture, Andor is still firmly within the moral architecture of rebellion against tyranny. The good cause may involve hard choices, but the cause itself isn't up for debate. The show's ethical sophistication lies in its depiction of what good people are forced to do within corrupt systems, not in whether their overarching goal should be achieved. It asks what it takes to resist fascism, not whether the fascists have a point. Which, to be clear, is not a failure of the show, it's just not in the tragic register in the Antigonean sense I'm probing.
Truly, you have a dizzying intellect.
The same can be said of much of prestige TV and genre fiction today. Writers have learned to humanize their villains, to give protagonists inner conflict, to muddy the means, but they rarely challenge the audience's foundational sense of who is in the right. Even Game of Thrones, early seasons, which was often lauded for its moral murkiness, was more about power politics and shifting loyalties than a deep clash of moral goods. The viewer's perspective was perpetually manipulated, yes, but the structure was still one of winner-take-all. No side ever truly represented a coherent, alternative vision of the good in competition with another such vision.
Inconceivable!
One may counter that we do, in fact, have plenty of stories about good versus good conflicts, though only at the level of personal relationships, so much so that it has become a trope. I'm talking, of course, about the love triangle. And I admit, the love triangle, when written with sincerity and emotional intelligence, is often the closest mainstream fiction gets to dramatizing a true good versus good conflict. Two desires or loyalties that are both entirely legitimate, but which, by their very nature, cannot be fulfilled simultaneously. Peter and Gail cannot both have Katniss. Edward and Jacob cannot both have Bella. Rory Gilmore could not pick between Jess and Logan without alienating half her fan base, or so I'm told. And unlike the more abstract philosophical or political domains, the audience is willing to feel the tragedy in this setting. The ache of inevitability, the impossibility of a happy resolution that doesn't involve real loss. When well written, these stories resonate because they mirror life. The painful recognition that we cannot have all goods at once, and that to choose one good is, inevitably, to forego another. But it's also true that popular fiction often recoils from letting this tension stand. It tends to retreat into a deus ex machina or a conveniently neat solution.
Yes, he left us that morning without any explanation.
Take Twilight. You'd think you can't both choose the brooding vampire and the hunky werewolf, unless, of course, you invent supernatural imprinting. And so, in the final book, there's that infamous plot twist, where Jacob, rather than being left heartbroken, conveniently imprints on Bella's newborn daughter, a baby who, as luck and supernatural loopholes would have it, matures at high speed and will become his perfect match in just a few years. Voila. Jacob gets his Bella, sort of, without stealing the actual Bella from Edward. It's an ending that resolves the triangle technically, but in a way that many readers, including my wife, a connoisseur of the series, found deeply weird and emotionally unearned. I read the books too, more willingly than I like to admit.
You could read a little bit more if you want.
And I have to agree, it felt like tragedy avoidance on steroids.
You imprinted on my daughter?
This then is the impulse in our fiction, not just to resolve, but to avoid the implications of true loss, of unchosen futures. Twilight's imprinting twist turns tragedy into soap opera, and readers feel it, not because they consciously object to happy endings, but because they sense that something has been cheated. The emotional stakes were real, but the resolution was evasive. Still, the love triangle, when stripped of melodrama and handled without caricature,
This bullshit macho competition for Nancy's attention.
What are you talking about?
has genuine tragic potential.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
But most literary or cinematic triangles fall into the trap of moral asymmetry. One suitor is clearly the better choice, or one is a narcissist, or one simply fades into irrelevance to make the choice easy, or one imprints on the heroine's baby girl. Ugh, that's not tragedy, it's pruning complexity for the sake of narrative narcotics. But the deeper point here is that by and large, audiences are far more capable of understanding and even embracing mutual legitimacy, good versus good, when the scale is intimate. Even if often imperfectly executed, we're used to seeing it in love stories, sometimes in family dramas, two children torn between loyalties to different parents, for example, or even in teacher-student narratives. But as soon as we scale up to nations, ideologies, religions, something hardens. We want villains, we want betrayal, we want a clean moral axis so we can plant our flag on the side of virtue and boo the other side off stage.
Oh, you suck!
This reveals something sobering about both our culture and our cognition, that our empathy seems to shrink as the stakes grow, not because we become less intelligent, but because our desire for narrative resolution grows stronger. Tragedy at scale is exhausting. Ambiguity is heavy. So we reach for simpler frames. This is especially tempting in geopolitical conflicts, where every side has its own propaganda, its own internal storytelling, and the sheer accumulation of historical detail makes it hard to step back and see the human logic underneath. But fiction could help, if it dared to stay in the tension. Imagine a large-scale epic that embraced the logic of the love triangle, not in romantic terms, but in political or civilizational ones. Not two good men love one woman, but two peoples, both with deep roots, both with valid claims, want the same land, the same capital, the same freedom. And neither is villainous simply for wanting it. That kind of story would be radical, not because it would excuse atrocities or equate all actions, but because it would refuse the easier good guys / bad guys story. It would honor the pain of choosing, the cost of any outcome, and it would perhaps prepare us to live in a world where tragic tension isn't the exception, but the norm. Which brings me back to the question whether the Israel-Palestine conflict is fundamentally such a story of good versus good, or whether Douglas Murray or his opponents are right after all, and it's the familiar story of good versus evil.
It would be absolutely, totally, and in all other ways inconceivable.
More about that next time.